This is joint work with Adele, Howe and Indrajit at Colorado State. And this is based on the work that I did for my dissertation. I'm now at Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C. So one of the things that I looked at in this study was how to extend classical planning in two directions. On the x-axis, I was interested in how can we extend it to multiple metrics, and on the y-axis is the number of solutions. So this is similar to the diversity work that was just presented by Dan here. These became the independent variables of my study, and I was going to evaluate these different approaches according to sort of the standard efficiency and quality metrics that we would expect, but also recent literature had been looking at this notion of plan diversity. And the central thrust of the work was that we can design better algorithms if we understand what's going on with the problem set and the interactions with the algorithms. And so what I'll present today is sort of some of the insights about the trade-offs between these quality metrics that I discovered and led in a specific direction for how to resolve these problems. The metrics for efficiency and quality are sort of the standard ones you might expect. In the cases where I have a single algorithm built on the same planning framework, I can use something like search cost. Most often I don't have that, so I'm going to use CPU time. For quality, this is often in plan length. I use some of the benchmarks that I have are older, so they require us to use plan length. And then there's also this other one that's come up recently since 2008 or so, 2006, is this plan cost. In the literature, Dan already sort of talked about some of these. This notion of stability, which is based on the action set difference between two plan sets, and the normalized one that was used by Srivastava. So the problem is that there are some additional pieces about differences, distinctions between the quality, the quality and the diversity metrics. Specifically, inside of a plan set, the uniqueness of the plan set is something that we might care about. This is getting very much to the same kind of idea where you can have plans in there that are longer than they really need to be. So uniqueness is supposed to measure how distinct all of the plans in a plan set are. And then this other notion that we came up with was parsimony. Again, the theme is that these planners can be driven to sort of babble and create plans that have longer sequences of actions that don't really drive towards the goal. And the way that I tested this, I'm not in optimal planning, so I can't use satisficing problems. But for the problems that I was able to run A star with a restricted set from the original plan of operators, then I could say something about how parsimonious the plans were. And then something I won't really discuss in the talk today, but is in the paper, is this notion of overlap, and that is related to how two plan sets overlap on just the set intersection. So we'll just mainly focus on this idea of uniqueness and parsimony. In particular, I'm interested in looking at this. I'll talk about some of the trade-offs I found. There's a lot more detail that you can go look at in the paper, specifically with how this notion of diversity, as well as some of the interesting things that we found out about metric interaction. Some of these are already shown. I called it diversity A star. This is the greedy FF thing that Dan was talking about. The heuristic is just a weighted combination of our distance metric, which is often diversity, and the original heuristic that we have. The LPG system, you can see, does a similar thing. It weights the distance metric alongside the heuristic. And I'm going to show some results that will demonstrate why that may be problematic for particular problems. I did do a randomized, so this may get to your question. I implemented my own version of RVAN, but I did not do some of the more sophisticated features. So this was just random walk search. And one of the algorithms that came out early in the study is this idea of iterated A star. So you saw an approach that changed the focus of the heuristic by looking at landmarks, and then these other approaches are also looking at more heuristic based. These are so two algorithmic approaches that I'm going to present in the paper are using a taboo list and multi-queue search. So this iterated A star starts from the initial state. This is justified by other work presented at ICAPS and elsewhere. So we just use a state-based taboo list, take the action operator pairs or state operator, state action pairs, and put them in a taboo list once we find a path. And then during search, we artificially increment the G value, and what that does is push those nodes that we've already explored deeper into the queue and forces a little bit more exploration. The benchmarks, I drew these from the existing diversity literature. I added the cybersec domain because that's actually what I didn't talk about in this talk, but it's the one that started us down this path. We were looking at something that was similar to the cybersecurity domain. And finally, transport was a natural application for a desire to have multiple alternatives. The experimental setup, forgot about that. The experimental setup was running 10 hours with 4 gigabyte. I was worried about having an artificial ceiling in my results, so I created 1,000 solutions. I don't think that would be reasonable, but for this experiment, I didn't want to have a ceiling, an artificial ceiling. This is the set of uniqueness metric results across those 5 domains. And one thing that I really want you to notice, first off, is that LPG is producing the most diverse plans. In some ways, Dan's talk sort of explains this already. We know that it's generating a lot of these spurious action sequences. So you would also expect random walk search to have a similar kind of babbling approach. The other thing that I want you to notice is that for this cybersecurity domain, actually the ITA star, which is this taboo list, really works well at producing unique solutions. But I mentioned this idea of parsimony, and here is the first solution from transport from each of these 3 algorithms. And you can see the inside of LPG, if we kind of look inside there, you'll see there's this repetitive action sequences, which look ridiculous to a human, right? I mean, one of the things that you want to have from a human, from the consumer of the plan, is that it's sensible, right? So this is a toy example that kind of demonstrates what's really going on. Imagine that we have this logistics domain of moving the package from the top to the bottom. We've already found a plan where the white truck took to the appropriate path, and now all we have to do to create a new diverse plan is have this truck drive around town, run some errands, and the problem is that really what we want in the end is that for any 2 plans with equal diversity, we want to prefer the one that minimizes the heuristic. And it gives us goal-directed behavior. So I called that parsimony and then came up with a way of measuring it in the plan sets. So here you see that, and so this would be higher is better. Higher is more parsimonious. And you can see that what we really have in this trade-off is that driving diversity using this heuristic, or driving diversity, often can lead to non-parsimonious solutions. The other thing that I looked at in this study was how metrics interact with each other. One of the surprising results was that, of that previous slide, was that, well, if I can also just generate more diverse plans with longer sets, and my quality metrics are going to correlate with that. So to what extent does diversity actually just correlate with plan length, and I don't really need to do much extra to create diverse plans. I just need to create longer plans, right? That led down this path of looking into the interactions of just a bi-criteria problem. So created a synthetic domain which has the same plan length and two metrics inside of it. So just x and y and their interactions, and then the linear combination of those. From a multi-objective function perspective, these are laughable, right? I mean, you would not expect, you would expect in realistic problems many more interesting kinds of combinations, right? So at the very least, you would like to hope that the planners don't have trouble with the easy. They have a little bit of trouble with hard, but they get the job done. And that these interactions don't impact search behavior all that much. In fact, what we found is that like work that was done by Wilton Rummel and Cushing and others, scaling in X or Y create a massive difference behavior between the algorithms that we studied. And collinear functions are challenging, but that has implications for how we combine these metrics inside of a single search mechanism. So the way that we resolve that is to do something that's already been done in other planners. So for example, if we have multiple heuristics, one way to overcome the bias of one heuristic compared to another is just create separate queues for them. This is what Llama did. So let's do that same thing for diversity metrics as well as the quality metrics that we care about. And let's see how well it drives diversity while maintaining parsimony. So the key idea here is just putting them in separate queues. I also created this idea of what I call the parsimony queue, which first minimizes by the heuristic and then maximizes by diversity. So we're hoping that this will also drive diversity in the right direction. Looking at the synthetic domain, there's a whole wealth of results that came out of the study. I'll just sort of highlight a few of them and to give you the key feel that it did work in some cases. On the left, you see the interaction between X and Y that I'm demonstrating. And the top row is showing, or the columns here are showing the different combinations of quality queues. And the top row is showing when just multi-queue is turned on without parsimony, and it just has the taboo turned on. You can see that solutions tend to clump in one region of the solution space versus the other. And if we turn on that parsimony queue, then we actually do drive some diversity across it. Now if you've done any work in multi-objective, the next question that you'll want to ask is, well, are these Pareto optimal? And I did not look at that in this study, but it is something that I'm very interested in looking at for future work. So you can already see that some of these are dominated solutions, but then the question would be, how soon does it come up with the non-dominated front across that spread? And I haven't done that analysis just yet. By example, here's another case where for a different, more curvilinear function, we see that their spread of solutions is also a little more diverse than the original without the parsimony queue. Generalizing to the benchmarks, we also looked at these different combinations, and it turns out that it does produce more unique plans, and it has better parsimony over those other approaches. ITSR is still best on the cybersec domain. It was doing really well before. There's really no reason to expect something that has more overhead would do better. Multi-Q A-star has higher overhead, so it would have been a surprise if it had done better. As I mentioned, the Pareto analysis needs to be done in order for us to understand really how quickly it's finding better solutions and what the true spread of the solutions is. There are several metrics that we could use to analyze that from the multi-objective perspective. Another issue is that I didn't mention this, but hopefully it came out, but I looked at A-star variance. In almost every case, the random walk search was not an A-star variant, but it's still an algorithmic approach. That was all implemented in one planning system. But then LPG, it's clearly a full planning system, has a much richer. So the data sets were sort of off from each other, and it was challenging to generalize and say a whole lot about the data that we did have because it was somewhat limited using algorithmic approaches. I suppose that's a classic trade-off, but hopefully maybe generate more data. Another thing that came up was, and I think I'll use this to motivate my closing, but the benchmarks themselves are somewhat emaciated with respect to metrics. Razzi, one of Maria Fox's and Derek Long's students, already studied this, and she showed that for many of the benchmark domains where they have multiple metrics inside of them, production and consumption kinds of domains, they still correlate strongly with plan length, or at least doing plan length doesn't really get you that much more. So it's a little troubling that I had to create this synthetic domain to do the analysis, but then I got right back around to the same end, right? Parsimony is more or less saying we still care a lot about plan length. The good news is we still linked search behavior to specific interactions, introduced a couple of new approaches, and came up with some new metrics for diversity. And I'm going to use the fact that I'm the last talk of the day to bookend something that I think Malik Galab was saying this morning. The real challenge here is that there's this old adage that what you measure is what improves, right? And the challenge here is that plan length remains intrinsic. I started off on a multi-objective campaign, and I ended up with plan length, and that's not a bad thing. I think it's fine. It's a fine thing to find again. But we have so many more applications that care about things that are not related to plan length. So I think what we really need to do is consider how to continue to push our work into new and challenging applications that challenge that assumption. And I think that the good news is that what I saw this week were lots of positive examples of that being the case. So. And hopefully maybe we see a little bit more of the mountaintop. I don't know. Any questions?
Why didn't you study oversubscription planning?
Why didn't I study oversubscription planning?
This seems to be one way to solve it.
That's why I'm repeating. I hear you, and I'm repeating it for the recording. So.
If I have oversubscription planning and my objectives are in competition with each other,
Right.
Right, I can look at the rock, or I can take pictures of the sky to use the space domain.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect set of multi-criteria problems.
So, I'm not sure I can. So why not just cast it as yeah. I suppose that's another approach. That I don't have necessarily have any issue with it. So.
To follow up on that, maybe it's not as much about plan length in that domain. You think about you're substituting. You're only able to support a certain number of objectives. So
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes plan length, but that's not really the issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because then you're saying I've got resource constraints that are correlated with plan length. The possible over-constrained objectives are in direct competition with each other.
Okay.
Well, one thing is diversity is not a single plan metric, though. It's sort of fundamentally different than these other metrics, right? So I was wondering if you had any thoughts about it. It seems like the key problem here is that, we want to trade off parsimony or other quality against diversity, but we don't have a good way of identifying when it's necessary to sacrifice parsimony and when you're just cheating.
Okay.
Right, when you're doing the hokey pokey, or when you actually, if you go, Dan, right. So Dan's, I think that brings us back to Dan's talk, right? So when it actually just, if you want to take that other pass, it's just going to cost you 4 more no matter what. So you have to be 4 longer to get diversity, as opposed to just buying diversity.
Well, I think for sure what's coming out, at least, is there are some initial approaches to this, and they seemed like they were generating diverse plans. But then when you look under the hood, it's sort of, how much more are you willing to go with these extra actions? And if it's not goal-directed behavior, is it really useful? So.
So the taboo stuff, that was on a per action basis or an action state pair?
Action state pair.
So, but grounded states, you didn't consider like sets of states or state types?
No,
like
this was
would?
just straightforward, yeah, grounded
Okay.
states. Yeah, well, yeah, so this was inside of Llama, so it was grounded states. But yeah, you could lift it.
Right, let's thanks our speaker again.